in Western medicine, we see the body as a battleground. We're going to fight cancer. We're going to fight ALS, breast cancer awareness. And we want to fight all the time. But what if instead of having that oppositional posture, we had a posture more like that of Eastern medicine? Let's cultivate good health and see what flourishes.
Welcome to the Deconstructing Conventional podcast. This interview is brought to you by Healing United, a private membership association committed to helping you reclaim sovereignty over your health, life, and future. You could say our tagline is question everything and rebuild intentionally. In the audio format of the show, there's additional commentary before each episode, and there are also over a dozen audio-only episodes. You can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the Healing United PMA app. Look for it in the App Store. And if you want to learn more about the work we do, and especially how we help people heal when the doctors have no answers, visit us online at healingunited.today. Now, on with the show. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. My guest is the one and only Hilda Labrada Gore. A little bit about her. Hilda is certified by the Institute for Integrative Nutrition as a health coach. So fellow health coach, love it. She is the host of the wildly popular Wise Traditions podcasts, which she hosts and produces for the Weston A. Price Foundation. And by the way, as I told her, I am insanely jealous of the number of people you've been able to interview, almost 500 episodes by now and 14 million downloads. I wish I could download that knowledge into my brain. But a few more things about her. So she is the director and producer of Holistic Hilda Productions. So she creates mini documentaries to highlight ancestral wisdom. And she has her own YouTube channel called Holistic Hilda. She says you could think of her as Dora the Explorer 2.0, which if you could see her posing now would be great. So Hilda has traveled to Kenya and Peru and Australia and Ecuador and Mongolia, Ethiopia, and more, exploring indigenous practices for optimal well-being. I love that because you don't just sit behind your computer waiting to see what the experts say about health. You're actually going out there and seeing what real people are doing. So
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Well, she describes herself as an experiential anthropologist, ancestral health advocate, educator, and content creator. She's a speaker at conferences, events, and hosts various ancestral tours and retreats. And appropriately, she is synthesizing her work from the last 10 years into a book. So I can't wait for that. I genuinely don't know, Hilda, if I could think of anybody in the health world who's got more breadth of experience in the holistic health arena than you do. So welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, Christian, I'm thrilled too. I feel like you do. Whether we're the guest or the host, we're always learning something, right? We have that curiosity, which I think helps us grow and then apply the bits and pieces that are relevant to our lives and to live more fully. I love my job. I love to ask questions. And so I'm grateful that you have me in the guest seat today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to ask you the one thing question later. We'll get to that. But so let's just step back and go to the beginning. So on your website, you mentioned that there's not one picture of you as a baby. So tell people why that is.
Wow. I just feel like I understand how precious life is, Christian, because I almost didn't make it. My parents, I don't think, took a single baby picture of me because they didn't think I was going to make it either. Basically, I was born with a birth defect. The short story is the doctors didn't notice anything at first, but as they started to listen to my heart more closely, they noticed there was a hole or a heart murmur. The blood was flowing between the lower two ventricles in a direction in which it shouldn't flow. Babies with my condition are often called blue babies because their blood isn't oxygenating properly. And so they monitored me closely. At that time, they actually didn't have the technology to be able to perform surgery until I was older. So they just watched me for years. And then I was 9 years old by the time they finally performed open heart surgery to sew up that hole. And that's what gave me a new lease on life. At that time, they said to me, you can do whatever you want. I was like, oh my gosh, what do I want to do? Well, first, I wanted to thank God because I felt like he spared me in the womb. It could have been so much worse.
Yeah.
And then he used the surgeon's skill to fix my heart. But then secondly, I wanted to make my body stay as strong and last as long as possible, and then to help other people do the same. So this shaky start to my life really set the course for the direction of my life.
Right on. Well, you said on your site that you went from skinny, scared, and limited to becoming strong, self-assured, and limitless. So tell us about that transformation.
Well, because I know we're fellow believers, I'll just be straight up with you. It didn't happen overnight, number one.
Okay.
But number two, a skinny, scared, and limited kid needed some kind of supernatural help. So I had a best friend whose family was Catholic. She was one of 8 kids. And whenever I spent the night at her house on Saturday night, they're like, okay, we're going to church on Sunday morning. And I didn't know much about it, I just knew that it felt so right in my spirit to go to church. I was like,
Mm.
I love this. And so after my surgery, a doctor actually remarked to me, she said, the cross might not have been like this, like a T, it might have been like a capital T. And that's exactly the shape of the scar on my chest. And she
Mm.
said, that's what you've got. And I was like, I felt like God marked me. So I believed early on.
Mm.
I was like, I believe in Jesus. I need a love stronger than my parents' love because they divorced when I was about 11, a
Mm.
couple years after the surgery. So it was all very shaky and very scary. So I needed a firm foundation. And that's when I turned to faith in God. And so that was also part of my life's trajectory. So it wasn't just helping people with the physical, it was helping people with the spiritual. I was a worship leader for years, a Bible study leader, vacation Bible school volunteer. My husband and I worked for Young Life. So I really think these go together because we're not just flesh and bones.
Right.
But
Yes.
interestingly, I'm now focused more on the physical health because I see that as a ministry as well. And when I was finishing up my years of worship leading, my pastor said, if you don't leave, Hilda, he said, I'm going to kick you out. And I was like, wait, what? Did I do something wrong? He's like, no. He could see God's fingerprints and blessing on what I was doing with the podcast. And he was like, you go, and
Mm.
God is going to use you. And by the way, Jesus healed people physically too, right?
Yes,
So
he
I
did.
know that the physical here and now matters to him as well.
Wow. Well, how does it? I want before I get ahead of myself, I want to make sure I close at least an open loop in my own head. So you had a doctor kind of, with a surgery kind of rescue you in some ways. How is it that you escaped kind of the medical pharmaceutical hamster wheel? Because it could have been, oh, they saved my life. I just need whatever they tell me, and I'm just going to endlessly follow that. Somehow you broke out of that. What kept you from going that route?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think I just had, I don't know, I don't want to just say a healthy skepticism because it wasn't just that. I think it was because I had the surgery and I spent a lot of time in hospitals being monitored, getting EKGs and x-rays. I was like, I want as little to do with that as possible.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, during the time of my surgery and my visits there for pre and post surgery observations, there was the 14th floor, which
Mm.
was a place for children to go for games and crafts. And I was forever going up to the 14th floor. And I remember one nurse or doctor was like, why are you always signing out and going up there? And I was thinking, well, actually, I didn't even know why, but now I know it's because I didn't want to be stuck in a room with a gown on and having needles stuck up my arm. So
Right.
I think that's what pushed me into how can I shore up my body naturally? And so even when I was going to have my 4 kids, I had 4 kids in 5 years. I didn't know anything about spacing, by the way, but I was like, I'm going to have them naturally. I don't want an IV in my arm, which can lead to Pitocin and then later an epidural, like all these interventions. I was like, no, I'm going to suck on ice chips. I'm going to have them without any meds. I just had a feeling, and probably it was really God led, but I was like, I'm just going to do my best to have this naturally. People have been having babies since the beginning of time without any interventions. It's not a sickness. Why do we need to go to the hospital in the first place, right? So I was making
Right.
choices based on my intuition and I think God's guidance.
Right on. Well, that's great. Now I was going to highlight it. Just sounds like there was an instinct that said something's off about this, and there's got to be a better path than walking around with a breezy gown and crinkle paper and needles in my arms. So,
A
right. Okay.
hundred percent.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
had had my fill by 9. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm done, baby. So I started working out, and then of course I found the Weston A. Price Foundation, which is about eating ancestrally, like what has served humanity well, and looking to that as opposed to the latest and greatest improvements on what nature and God have given us.
right. Okay. Well, let's blend those two. So when did you first come up with the name Holistic Hilda and kind of know you wanted to make your mark there? And when did you come across the work of Dr. Weston Price?
Great question. So for me, the first thing I thought I wanted to help people do is just to stay strong physically. So
Okay.
I taught exercise classes. And get this, a friend of mine called the organization I worked for Jumping Jacks for Jesus. It was not Jumping Jacks for Jesus. It was called Body and Soul Fitness, but it did combine the physical and the spiritual. I loved it. We would start classes with prayer. We would work out to worship music. I was like, this is awesome. And it was.
Hmm.
I didn't give a second thought to other aspects of well-being, not being outside, not getting my feet on the ground, face to the sun, none of the things that I so love now, until a dear friend of mine became sick. And she said to me, oh my gosh, Hilda, like all the conventional doctors don't have answers for me. She had chronic fatigue, basically.
Mm.
And she met Sally Fallon Morell, the president of the Weston A. Price Foundation, at a health fair. And Sally said, look back for good health today, basically. In essence, she said, you need to look to the past, don't look to the modern science because they're catching up to traditional wisdom. So my friend started to shift her diet and started to see improvements. And I thought, why didn't I think of this before?
Yeah.
Here I was, as I told you, moving in the direction of natural stuff in terms of the childbirth and the exercise, but it hadn't occurred to me that the processed foods might also not be doing me any favors. So I started making that shift probably really 20 years ago or so. And then when I started getting closer to the Weston A. Price Foundation, they sent me to Kenya. Oh my gosh, so many stories I can tell you. But the bottom line is, as I was developing the podcast and my own website too, because I was working part-time for the foundation and part-time on my own, I was at first going to name my website something like Holistic Health Network. And my website guy was like, Hilda, that sounds like an HMO. That is not going to work, Holistic Health Network. He's right, actually, it'd be a great HMO. And I said, well, a friend of mine in the podcasting space, he calls me Holistic Hilda. And my friend was like, that's it, Holistic Hilda. And I like the alliteration. I've always been a word girl. I used to be a translator, so I'm all about words. I love writing. But then I was like, oh my gosh, it fits me so perfectly because the more people I've interviewed, Christian, and the more travels I've taken, and that started about 2016 or 2015, the more I've come to realize that health isn't single faceted, it's multifaceted. It's like a diamond. And of course, there are seasons of our life, but I suggest we really consider all the different factors like relationships and how much time we spend in nature and our stress levels and all the things play a part in our well-being. It is not just one thing or the other. And as much as I see food and even movement is foundational, I know that there's much more to the puzzle. So I'm so glad my friend dubbed me Holistic Hilda. That's the name of my website too. And now I've got information on there that complements the work of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Because like I said, I work for them part-time and kind of on my own as a content creator, Dora the Explorer 2.0 on my own.
Fantastic. Well, I love that on so many levels. Anybody that has listened to my show knows how I like to think holistically as well, and mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. And
yes,
I've been at this almost as long as you, about 2005, and you can't separate them anymore. They're just the same puzzle. And once you kind of metabolize that, it's so much quicker to go to the heart of the matter with people. And there are so many medicinal things, spirituality, food, movement, sleep, water, sunshine, et cetera, that are so easy to deploy. But anyway, so comments on that, but I do want to hear your thoughts and define a couple terms here on what is ancestral health. And for people who don't know who Weston Price is, tell them that so we kind of have that as the context for the rest of our discussion.
Yeah, so I think ancestral health is living as naturally and as close to nature as possible, connected, maybe I would just say, with God and our neighbor and nature. Nobody has a trademark on that. You know, there's the paleo movement that has to do with food. There's the Weston A. Price Foundation that's about food, farming, and the healing arts, but it's kind of a lifestyle. And I think in the past, people might have called it, you know, crunchy or hippie. It's the idea that, you know, our answers don't come in a pill or prescription, in a program, or from a physician. Really good health is our birthright, and it's something that you cultivate like a garden.
Yeah.
In Western medicine, we see the body as a battleground. We're going to fight cancer. We're going to fight ALS, you know, breast cancer awareness. And like, we want to fight all the time. But what if instead of having that oppositional posture, we had a posture more like that of Eastern medicine? Like, let's cultivate good health and see what flourishes.
Yeah.
You know, let's put in all the good inputs, like I said, from the sun, from getting our feet on the ground, from positive relationships and forgiveness and good food and all the things, and watch what flourishes. I think we're too much, honestly, Christian, in a reactive mode as opposed to an active mode. And what I mean by that is we wait until we have a pain and then we're like, oh, what pill can I pop for that? We're looking for a quick fix.
Yeah.
What if instead of waiting for the pain and that message to be our bodies whisper to us like, hey, you need to get some help here. What if we instead took our health into our own hands and took steps to make sure our stress levels were balanced, our relationships were positive, we're picking the best food we can within our budget to nourish ourselves? Like, I think we'd be less likely to be dealing with the pain. The pain is simply the body telling us, hey, something's up.
Yeah.
And that's when we start listening. But it'd be great if we could avoid that altogether. So I guess to answer your question about ancestral health, like I said, nobody has the corner on the market, but I think the idea is to live as naturally as possible with as few interventions as possible. My goal right now is to stay out of the hospital for the rest of my life. You know, I don't even want to
Right.
go there to die. I'd rather just, die scuba diving or something. um, but to answer the question of Weston Price, so he is a man who's often overlooked as a health pioneer. And the cool thing is, it's not like he's the hero of the story, Christian.
Right.
He found the heroes all over the world, the people living as I just described.
Hmm.
He took it upon himself in the 1930s to travel the world. He got National Geographic magazine and he was like, where the heck are these people? I'm just putting it in my vernacular, but he's like, what has happened? These people look amazing. They have beautiful teeth, broad smiles, great facial structure, good posture. They look happy and fertile and strong and resilient. And the people I'm seeing in my clinic in Ohio, because he was a dentist and a researcher, he's like, these kids have crowded teeth, they have cavities, they have poor posture, poor hearing, poor behavior. So he's like, I got to go find out what's happening. So literally, he grabbed his wife Florence by the hand, and for 10 years, every summer, they would travel to a new place. They went to Switzerland and the South Sea Pacific Islands and Scotland and Alaska and Kenya and Ecuador. They were all over the place. And he was looking for the people that were living untouched by modern lifestyles and diet. And he was curious about what they were eating exactly, what was making them so strong and fertile and resilient. And of course, as you can imagine, the diets were different everywhere. So in Switzerland, it was like dairy and butter and maybe sourdough bread. And in Kenya, it was milk and meat and blood. And in Alaska, it was seafood. So they were very different, but they all had things in common. And basically, this was the thesis or the premise for his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And so he carefully documented what they were eating. He sent their food back to his lab in Ohio for analysis. And he found out that everyone was eating local, seasonal, organic, traditional foods. So there wasn't any flour or sugar or vegetable oils. It was not canned foods. It was all like single ingredient foods, foods that your grandparents would recognize as food, right?
Hmm.
And so he wrote this book and he was able to document how beautiful and happy and strong the people looked compared to those with the same bloodlines who had left their traditional diets and started to incorporate, even in his day, they could get flour and sugar and all these things. And they started to notice their own health deteriorate. And the next generation significantly also started to have conditions that weren't good. They were not living their best, healthiest, optimal birthright lives. They had narrower faces that were a sign that they weren't getting the nutrition in utero that they needed. And then they would have conditions and so forth. So fascinating, fascinating work. And all of this is the basis for the foundation in his name today. So it's called the Weston A. Price Foundation. And I host and produce the podcast Wise Traditions. And it's been my privilege.
No kidding. What, and just to hear the breadth of podcasts you've been able to cover in food farming and the healing arts, what a tome of a resource. If you guys have not listened to this podcast, you're missing out. I would honestly say it's my favorite show out there because there's just so much wisdom on it. But you also had you got the travel bug at some point, the itch to follow in his footsteps. So tell us a little bit about your travels, what you've seen, maybe some of the biggest lessons that have stood out to you.
I have so many beautiful stories to tell you. I hardly know where to start, but I will start with the first one. So in 2015, this is when I was still a volunteer for the foundation. I was a chapter leader. They were like, we're looking for 2 volunteers to go to Kenya. They said, because a Maasai warrior contacted us. And he said, please send someone over. We're all getting sick. A Maasai warrior. These are the ones that are tall and, hale and hearty, the ones Dr. Price had seen so many years ago. He said, I have diabetes, this warrior said. My wife has asthma. He had seen the physical degeneration of his own people, his own tribe, his own village. And he was like, send someone over. He's like, I can tell them, but they're probably not going to listen to me. The Bible says a
Yeah,
prophet is
right.
not welcome in his own hometown. So I raised my hand. I was like, I'll go. And someone else volunteered. So off we went in 2015. And it was so beautiful because I had the privilege of saying, don't eat the American way, for goodness sakes. I was like, eat your way. What has served you well since you can remember? And I can't get over. I remember vividly being with this Maasai tribe when they slaughtered a goat, and the way they did it was a little boy, he must not have been older than 12, covered the goat's snout to suffocate it in like a very humane way. He was like, okay, we're slaughtering this goat. I hope they weren't just doing it for me. But anyway, they slaughtered the goat, they cut it open. I saw the Maasai drinking the blood, We put its fat like over a little fire and we were literally sitting around chewing the fat, squatting. I was like, oh my gosh. So this tribe was still living according to its tradition, except they had started to see the influx of the flour and the sugar. At one point, I was eating with a Maasai woman. She was wearing her colorful garb, the beaded jewelry, all the things. In one hand, she had a chai tea laden with sugar, and in the other, I promise you, it was a white bread jam sandwich. And I was like, oh
Wow.
no. So this is what had led to the physical deterioration or degeneration that my friend Dixon, this warrior, had noticed. Well, anyway, so when I was there, I had the privilege of talking to a Maasai elder. And as he came up, I promise you also, he was like nearly 100 years old, if not over 100. We were kind of
Wow.
doing the math behind his back because some tribes don't keep track of age. We're like, okay, he was here when the tea came to Kenya. We were like making all these notes. But anyway, and I was like, I have to ask this man questions. So I grabbed my iPhone, not being a podcaster yet, but I was like, I'm going to interview him basically. I hit voice memo and through a translator or two, like I would talk in English, someone would translate it into Swahili, someone else would translate it into Ma, and then Ole Sanku, the elder, would like talk back. And anyway, through a kind of telephone translation situation, I asked him, what was your diet like as a child? What did you do when you got sick? What, and just all these questions. And he said, our diet was whatever we could catch. That's what he said, literally. They were hunters, right? And they were nomadic. So he was like, if we could get a rhino, great. If we could get a hippo, fine. And I mean, whatever they could catch. He said, maybe some wild berries and honey, but that was the extent of the diet. He said, and then when I said, well, what did you do when you got sick? He said, we never got sick. And I was shocked. You could have picked my jaw up off the dirt floor of the hut. I was just like, what? And then he said, yeah, if we ever felt like a shiver coming on, he said we would just drink milk from the cow, and he demonstrated it drinking straight from the udder. He showed me like
Wow.
we would drink from the cow, and I was like, oh. And then I was like, well, why are your grandchildren being told? Because he's like, my grandchildren are being told, wear a jacket, it's getting cold. He's like, we didn't have jackets. And they're being told, get a shot because disease is coming, but we didn't have shots. Like he was talking to me all these things. I said, what is the difference now? And he said, education. And I
Hmm.
was like, oh, so that was interesting. In other words, as like the government has come in to kind of
Hmm.
educate the Maasai, unfortunately, I think there's this natural erosion that happens, if not accidental or unintentional erasure that's happening of their own cultural practices and
Yeah.
kind of a replacement or displacement of those by saying, well, that's how your grandparents did it, but this is what we do today. And you didn't use fertilizer, but we do, and this is what we recommend, that kind of thing. So, oh my gosh. So fascinating conversation. That's what propelled me. I was like, oh my goodness. So the Weston A. Price Foundation lifts up ancient wisdom. I was like, I've got to see if they want to have a podcast and I will host and produce it. So that was the catalyst. And when I came
Got
back
it.
and asked Sally, she said, okay, go for it. And now what's kind of cool is we do lift up Indigenous voices. I've had Dixon on the show, an Aboriginal woman, people all over the world, an Ecuadorian midwife, but we also talk to experts who understand that ancient wisdom is the way to go. And that's why, as you have suggested, the podcast doesn't just encompass, let's say, kind of paleo or primal ways of eating, but it encompasses mindset and energy work and the importance of being in nature. And there's just so much that plays into our well-being. So I'm so happy that, yeah, the scope is exactly food farming and the healing arts for the podcast, but that encompasses a lot as well.
Yeah, it does. And I think that story maybe better defined ancestral health or ancestral wisdom than attempting to put it to words. Just tell a story and like, oh, now I get it. Like the ancestral wisdom in that elder that you talked about, he knew what to do, but I mean, it's such you could apply this lens to so many cultural phenomena. We have walked away from and lost traditions that were actually edifying and nourishing and holistic and so many other beautiful things for this commercialized wisdom coming, whether it's government or teachers. And it's that you physically saw that in the erosion in the people in front of you, juxtaposed against this elder who's over 100 or whatever,
I
who has got
know.
robust health. And you're like, somewhere we took a wrong turn here. And
Absolutely. And I have to tell another quick story of Australia because that made a big impression on me too. So I got to meet with this woman. She calls herself an ancestral whisperer, Suzanne Thompson. She's of the Inangai tribe because just like Native Americans in the US have a lot of different tribes, so do the Aboriginal people. So she invited me outside of Barcalda in this town in the Northern Territories there in Australia to visit this land. And oh my gosh, Christian, like she showed me places where the Aboriginal people had put stencils on like these cave walls, like made of blood and urine and spit, and they would mix it up in their mouth and they would kind of almost instead of a spray paint can, they would like spray it with their mouths around the hand. They would leave a handprint. And the rock was so porous, it would absorb that
Huh.
kind of natural paint. And it's still there to this day. Anyway, it blew my mind. And of course there were emus sketched up there and kangaroos and all kinds of things. But anyway, but I'll never forget sitting on the hillside overlooking this land with my friend Suzanne. And she said, Hilda, this is our grocery store, or
Huh.
this was our grocery store. And I was like, oh my gosh. Contrasting that with in that same country in Australia, I got to go to this town called Maningrida, which for lack of a better descriptor, I will call kind of almost like an Aboriginal reservation of
Hmm.
sorts. And people told me, you really don't want to go there. It's very difficult to go there. But I was like, no, I want to go there. I want to go there. So I got permission to go in. It was very limited where I could go because basically they didn't want outsiders to come and observe and, kind of infiltrate in the people's culture there and stuff. But I couldn't help but notice there was one grocery store in this town. It was right next to the Hasty Tasty, which is as bad as it sounds.
That sounds horrible.
It was like a 7-Eleven, and believe it or not, I bought some fish and chips there because I was really hungry. I was kind of desperate myself. But anyway, when I was there, the cashier said, "Are you visiting?" Obviously, I was visiting. I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Why on earth would you come to Manangrita?" And it was so clear she was depressed. And then
Mm.
I went in the grocery store, and all they had was like those little like fake Kool-Aids you'll see at 7-Elevens and canned foods and boxed foods. And I thought, we've removed these people from their traditions where the grocery store was their immediate surroundings, where they would fish and do all these things. And we put them in this place. Of course they're depressed. I mean,
Yeah.
it shocked me, but I learned a lot that day. And I continue to learn about the importance of, yes, tapping the wisdom of those who are still willing to share it and recognizing that we're meant to be a part of nature, not apart from nature.
Fantastic. What a story. And you kind of set me up well for another thing I want to talk to you about because there's so many topics that you and I both looked into and we got a long run doing it. But so we've talked nutrition and healing modalities and detox and what, but there's this budding kind of cultural conversation going on right now about so-called energy medicine. And I don't have the breadth of travel experience or interviews you've done, but there's so many different perspectives on that. And you and I both come from a Christian perspective. So since you've mentioned it a couple of times, I want to kind of just see what kind of filter that we both see and hear through. And so you neither, but we can't stay in the health world very long without coming across what I guess I would just call the woo-woo in the health
Yes.
world. And there's this just broad category of purported healing modalities that can fit under energy medicine. And so you and I both know there are plenty of invisible things that impact our health, and EMF is an easy example, right? So,
Yes.
but what, Hilda, is your filter? How do you separate out kind of what I'd call the fluffy woo-woo, the new age spiritualism, and not also throw out the baby with the bathwater and
Mm.
maybe inherently dismiss genuinely powerful healing modalities? How has your thinking become more nuanced about that over the years?
That is a great question. So just as Sally said, modern science is catching up to traditional wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same is true in the energy category. And let me explain. I'll never forget when I was in Mexico and I got to connect with Dr. Rashid Buttar,
Oh
who,
yeah, he
may
was
he rest in
great.
peace. I know
Yeah,
he was outspoken during COVID, and that might have actually led to his demise, but that's another story and perhaps a conspiracy theory.
yeah.
But what I want to tell you is this. Rashid was demonstrating to me that he had a bracelet. And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, look at this bracelet. He goes, what we can do with this bracelet is tell people at a headquarters in Texas, and I don't know how he set this up exactly. It was almost like a Fitbit, let's just say. He said, we can tell people in headquarters in Texas that we need more love or peace or joy or whatever. He goes, and then they'll send that energy to us through this bracelet. And I was like, I didn't say this to him, Christian, but I was thinking, okay, that's prayer, basically.
Yeah.
That's prayer. He
Uh-huh.
is asking someone on another part of the planet to send energy his way. And so I was like, I think this woo-woo world is only catching up to Christianity.
Yeah.
They are recognizing that there are other forces at play when it comes to well-being, that we are not just flesh and bone. So though they may call it by a different name, I personally, as a Christian, am not threatened by it because I see it as a step closer to my understanding of the work of the Holy Spirit, of the fact that we are a body of Christ, it says in 1 Corinthians 12 and
Yeah.
Romans 12, I believe. So I think we are more connected than we realize. I don't really, I guess I wouldn't buy into the language of, we're raising the collective consciousness. Like that does sound woo-woo. But
Hmm.
what those people are really trying to say is that the way we relate to one another matters.
Yeah.
So let's just put it in very plain layman's terms. If you had a bad day and you're aggravated and you're stressed and you come home and you kind of unload and say some unkind words to your wife, and then she said something kind of edgy or snappy to one of the kids, and then the kid does it to the dog, that energy isn't just confined or shared in your household. There's something about what's happening there that's affecting the larger world, your Christian brothers and sisters, and I would say everyone, because now I'm not getting the phone call from you where you're checking in with me because you're in a bad mood, and we all know these
Right.
things, whether we're Christians or not. Like we can walk in a room and sense that there's tension if a fight just happened, not because anyone has said anything, but we can feel it, right?
Right.
So I think as Christians, we tend to be too quick to dismiss what is, I would say, not threatening to our worldview, but also a reality. So I just finished revisiting Eileen McCusick's book. I think it's called Electric Body, Electric Health.
Hmm.
And she talks about, I did interview her on the podcast, by the way, and she's big on biofield tuning, like taking a tuning fork to kind of measure the energy of your body and determine where there's stuck trauma. And again, this might be labeled woo-woo, but I can't forget when I was 9 years old and before that surgery, how the doctors would use electrocardiograms or EKG tests to check on the rhythm of my heart. It was measuring the electricity of my body, or
Right.
something that can't quite be quantified in other ways. And then you can also get the same kind of thing for your brain. And what about the MRI? Like, what kind of scans are they doing of our physical bodies that involve electromagnetic fields? So I think both science and ancestral wisdom and our own experience as Christians tell us that there's more to us than meets the eye, and we don't need to be, I would say, alienated by some of these understandings. Now, that also means for me personally, I'm not going to subject myself necessarily to every treatment that comes along because I don't know what spirits might be called on to release me from trauma, supposedly, or I have to be judicious, I would say.
Yeah.
And this is where I would hearken back to Psalm 46:10 that says, "Be still and know that I am God."
Right.
Because if I'm still, I'm going to hear what the Holy Spirit has to tell me. And I also have to understand, Christian, that there are places in the Bible where it says some people will eat meat sacrificed to idols and others will not because it's a matter of conscience, right?
Hmm.
So I think some Christians could have like a tuning fork tuning and be fine, and others are like, that's not going to work for me. And I think that's okay. I think this is a little bit of a gray area where people need to listen to the Holy Spirit. But I think we're too quick to say, oh, that's herbalism. Oh, that's witchcraft. And I think that's a way to dismiss things that are actually part of God's plan for healing. Because when I was in Ethiopia 2 summers ago, I was with some tribes people among the Omo Valley there, and they would point out, oh, that tree has leaves that are good if we get malaria, and that tree has something for yellow fever. And they were not worshiping the trees, but they
Hmm.
knew that the trees had something to offer them that was healing. And so I think we just have to be very judicious as Christians in terms of what we're going to get involved in, but also recognize that God has placed things around us to heal us and that we are more than flesh and bone.
Man, what a great answer. You may have to rewind that, people, and go listen to it again because there's so many, well, there's pearls, there's principles in there. But let me give you a few that have helped me and see if you can add to it or embellish
Great.
it. So one of a pastor said one time, don't judge someone else's peace, which I thought was a great way to say it. Like we are going to have somewhat different perspectives or even levels of readiness. And the Holy Spirit may say, you're not, that's not for you for now. There may be something else going on there. But um, another pastor said that every ology is a subcategory of theology. And I love that because essentially what I think I heard you saying is whatever we're finding that we can measure in this invisible realm, whether it's magnetism or light or motion or like the wavelengths that, yeah, we can find and replicate that and it's predictable and there's something there. But even though we can't see it, whatever that is that we're finding, what it's doing is pointing us to the one that made it and the creator of it. And there's two major things that I see where Christians or people in general get off track with their spiritualism relative to either it's energy medicine or just the things they entertain in their mind. And one is conflating the creator with the created. We take these things that we can measure and quantum energy or whatnot, and we say that energy is God, or we are just one with that. And they've blurred or erased the distinction between us and God, and as if we're one thing. And then the other big one that I see is the idea that the things that we can measure in that realm, or the insights somebody like a psychic or other people might get, that anything we can explore in that realm is benevolent and doesn't have an agenda maybe of evil or to harm us. It's not there to manipulate us. It's only good. And I think recognizing that there's a real category of evil, and there's things God prohibits on purpose, divination and such, that he's very firm that this is not for you to do. And the recognition that we are not God, and that I don't need to worship the stars or the trees. I can worship the one who made it and created that order and stand in awe of that. But those are just some of the things that have helped me give me some boundaries or navigate this world. But what would you add to that, or tweak or upgrade? Or
I love those. I love not to question someone else's peace, that all ologies are under theology and that we're not God. That's where some of my friends, because I do have a lot of friends in this space who think differently than I do, I'm like, okay, that's a line for me. I think it's good to know where your convictions stand. And again, to keep seeking God to determine where they are when they're like, well, we're all one and we're all God. And I'm like, okay, if I'm God, we're in trouble, because
right.
I am not God. I did not create that tree out there, or you. Like, I do believe we are made in his image.
Right.
And
Yep.
I do believe that he has given us as children of God the ability to influence the things around us, I will say. People sometimes we'll call it co-creation, and that might be giving us, more credit than we're due. But I do think we have an impact on the people around us. And so we need to be very, very attuned, I would say. So keep seeking God. He says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open to you. So this is why I let my curiosity, or let God use my curiosity to lead me, but I also am careful to make sure I know where I stand. A quick story I do want to tell you, though, is I'm not threatened by other people's belief systems, because I think sometimes I can learn from their dedication, from their expression of faith. And I hope that they can learn from mine. I don't go into some indigenous communities with the hope that I'm going to witness, though. Get me right, Christian, I will witness. I will witness because I am a light bearer, but I'm not going in to necessarily convert as much as to connect. And I think in that connection, things may shift for both of us. But anyway, I'm saying that because I think in the past, sometimes, missionaries would come in and, again, unwittingly, but obliterate the traditional cultures that have their beauty and their place. And I think there is a verse in the Bible that says God has written eternity in everyone's heart, so that, anyone is without excuse. So we're all kind of seeking and on that journey and on that path. Some people simply may not have heard of Jesus. But to go back to what I was going to say is, when I went to Ecuador, I was invited to be a part of a festival called Inti Raymi. And when I did a quick Google search to understand it better, it said, well, this is a sun worshiping festival. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to worship the sun sun, I will worship the sun son. But I was like, okay, let me see what's happening. I'm invited. I'm going to go down. So I try to be judicious, like I said. Well, I get there and I find out it's not a sun worshiping festival. When I talked to the Quechua people that I met, they said, we are offering thanks to God and to the earth for its provision. It was almost more of a Thanksgiving. And they're like, and we do this little dance to kind of re-energize the earth after it's given us the harvest. And I'm like, this is cool. So I danced along with them, because I knew we weren't doing some kind of worship the sun and the earth dance. It was a gratitude dance. I was like, I can get into this. So I think not everything is as it seems. And I also think, again, we have to keep seeking, and going in with a learning posture for me as I travel different places is important. So I'm not, coming in with a heavy hand of judgment or condemnation of someone else's faith tradition, but I can bring mine alongside and hopefully pique curiosity in those around me.
Yeah, well, it's a testament to the idea that you can learn something from anyone, and that there is all truth is God's truth. If it's true, it's because He made it that way, and maybe I had to learn it, or I had the opportunity to learn it from someone who saw the world a little bit differently. I remember in seminary there was a book that we were reading, and it was kind of this idea between faith and logic, and our duty to have a reasoned defense. And that one of the imageries they put in the book was there's this, this mountain, there's these scientists finally scaling the last mountain of ignorance they could find, and they get to the top, and there's just a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries, like, oh, you guys took the long way, but you made it. Like, we had the gondola, we trusted this originally, and now we know. But you went the hard way to around the end around to figure out that God really is who He said He was, and to not put Him in a box where He can't speak. He speaks through a donkey. He makes the sun stand still in the sky. He writes on a wall. And there's that weird section in Acts 19 where Paul prays over aprons and handkerchiefs, and then they give them out to people, and the people who touch those are healed. I'm like, whoa. There's, to your point, there's prayer. There's something in this realm that is that we are asked to test the spirits, and we are asked to have discernment and not be afraid of what's invisible, what we can't see, but not fall for every shiny object. And so tell us maybe some of the things, Hilda, that you see maybe as gifts that God's given us for healing that we might tend to overlook, or help Christians not be so scared or paranoid that we dismiss things. But where can we maybe find some principles that give us a little more discernment what would be some examples of things that you'd say are super helpful?
Before I go there, Christian, I have to be vulnerable. I think I told you before we started rolling, I'm an open book. And so I have to tell this story because
Do it.
there was one time when I said yes to someone that had a healing modality that I knew nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't even remember what it was called exactly, but I was like, let's just say maybe it was light work. I was like, oh, light work, that sounds good, okay. I ended up in this room with this woman that I didn't know. She was saying words over me that I couldn't understand and doing some strange ritual things. And afterwards, I was like, never again, never again. I'm not going to submit myself to something, and I did pray afterwards, and I was like, God cleanse me. But I was like, because I didn't know what she was praying. And that was a little scary, to be honest. I was like, okay, got to be careful, got to be discerning. So I don't want people to think I'm perfect. And there may be others who say, well, Hilda, that's great for you to go in with these communities wanting to connect and not convert. But I really want to evangelize the world, and blessings on you. That is your ministry. That is exactly your calling. Like Paul said, some are evangelists, some are teachers, some are, healers, whatever. I do want to let God's light shine through me, but I don't feel like that's exactly what He's called me to do. Do I have opportunities? Yes. Do I take them? Yes. So, but I think it's because of my background with Young Life. I'm a little bit more relationship evangelism, coming alongside people, getting to know them, and letting God's light shine through me. But in terms of things I think we don't need to fear, well, first of all, don't let somebody pray over you when you don't know what they're saying, but unless it's the gift of the Holy Spirit or something, speaking in tongues. I would say one thing is being willing to look at trauma as a root of illness. This is something that's known as, well, it's actually seen in a lot of healing modalities, including German new medicine, maybe even in this electric body, biofield tuning work as well. Because I think, well, I shouldn't even say I think, I'm convinced that sometimes it's not a physical ailment that we're dealing with, even if it feels that way. Let's say your shoulder hurts and you're like, man, did I just tweak that playing pickleball or something? Like, what's going on here? It could have to do with grief.
Yeah.
It could have to do with the fact that you're carrying a burden that's too big for you emotionally or energetically. It could have to do with the fact that your mom was unstable when you were growing up. And so you've been kind of carrying the weight of that. I don't know how it's going to express itself in your body, but not all physical pain has a physical root. That's how I would put it. And so be willing to, maybe the first thing you want to do is talk to a Christian therapist. Okay, great. Though I sometimes think that talking about it can just kind of embed the grooves deeper in your psyche and body in a way. So I'm not really sure about that, but you need to find what works for you. I think even massages or lymphatic draining can be good because it's all of a piece. So when you move, for me, for decades, I taught these exercise classes. I was certified by the American Council on Exercise. So for body and soul fitness, I was teaching classes like 3 or 4 times a week. I think all that movement really helped me release some trauma. I wasn't raised in a perfect home. My parents divorced, as I might have mentioned earlier when I was 11. So it was tough. And then I was looking for love. I had a hole in my heart that wasn't just physical.
Yeah.
And so I, kind of dated around. Anyway, I made my commitment to Christ when I was about 17, and God started to fill that hole. But there were definitely a lot of ways in which I needed to grow spiritually and emotionally, mentally and physically. But the point I'm getting at is you might have an emotional or psychological trauma that has led to whatever physical condition you're in right now. So feel free to explore, yeah, some energy work, or even, like I said, working out. I know that's great for mental health anyway. Another thing I would avoid fearing is maybe even looking into more herbal medicine or essential oils. To be honest, I've interviewed some people on the topic, but I don't take a lot of teas and things, but I'm interested in them, and I wouldn't be averse if I had any kind of pain point. Right now, I don't. But I do think that even though this earth has its toxins, God is always greater, and there's more abundance of what works and heals than the
Hmm.
things that will hurt and kill. So I would recommend turning to that for possibilities, because did you know that pharmaceutical medicines, they're basically imitating things in nature that God has given us? Like aspirin, for example, originally was from the bark of a tree. And then they started thinking, oh, well, we can save money if we use petroleum for the base of these pills, and we don't need to get all the natural stuff. But the synthetic stuff isn't as good, in my opinion. So feel free to turn to that. And here's the third one. This one might be controversial, but I would even say homeopathy. And I personally, again, I've only taken it once, I think when I was traveling to Africa, and I thought, well, let me get a homeopathic remedy for malaria just in case. But what homeopathy is, it's actually energy. I think they stick energy in these little like sugar balls, let's just say, and you can put it under your tongue. And apparently, the energy is healing. And so I say, just like Jesus did, you can tell a tree by its fruit.
Yeah.
If this was making us sicker, then absolutely don't get it. And by the way, that's most pharmaceuticals. If
Yep.
this is doing good for people and it's putting them on the right path without any contraindications or side effects, I say it's worth exploring. But again, take all of this to the Lord in prayer, because something I might be cool with might not work for you and your family. But I say, let's embrace what's natural. And what we really should be saying no to in this world is all the fake stuff that is man-made.
Wow. That was great. Another rewind section and listen to that one again. But yeah, there's so much out there that is efficacious, and we do not need to be afraid of it, but we can test the spirits and we can say, this doesn't sit right with me, and maybe it never will, or maybe it will later as I learn more. But yeah, there's something mysterious about the order that God created into the universe, where there is memory inside cells, and it isn't just memory of what B vitamin I'm missing. It's memory of things that have happened to me. I just finished recently a book called The Field by Liz McTaggart, and there's all this documentable stuff about what's in the body or what's in a single cell and what memory is in, even in water, that there are things, that's what homeopathy works with. There's a memory that this particular plant medicine, that the water's captured. And the more you dilute it, the more the water's like, I got it. Don't worry. It's the weirdest thing.
I love it. I know,
But
I know. And that's not woo-woo. It's like God's design.
yeah,
I mean, look at how Moses, raised his staff and parted the Red Sea. Of course, that wasn't Moses, that was God. But the point is, water responds. There was just energy going out, the Holy Spirit, right? And so
yeah,
while we might look askance at like Vita Austin or Isabel Friend, these women who are talking about like water having memory and stuff, it's quite likely in my estimation, because our bodies are mostly composed of water. So this is why we want to say, I think, good things. And this is why over our bodies, over our kids' bodies, saying, oh my gosh, I love you so much. Do you know that changes something in them?
yeah,
So let's not be afraid of the fact that energy impacts things and it impacts us. And think about how we pray over food, for example.
yeah, right.
Wherever I go, I try to get the groups and again, I hang out with definitely woo-woo people, or people who would call themselves spiritual and not necessarily Christian. But I'm
Hmm.
like, look, whatever your faith tradition, let's pause over this meal. Let's
Hmm.
give thanks, because I figure it's one step in the right direction. And they understand. They're like, oh yeah, if we pause and we almost like put our hands over our food, that's going to change how this food enters our body. And
Yeah.
so it starts to help them kind of almost even for them wed let's just say maybe mysticism with an understanding of faith. It's so fun. And I'm not threatened by these worldviews. Some of them really resonate with me, because it seems to me they go hand in hand.
Yeah. Well, I imagine you are. I'm not afraid to interview anyone. I'll happily have conversations with people, because they always stretch my thinking, and
Yeah.
typically they force me deeper into the word and into like, what does the Bible say about that? Or what have I not understood about the created order that might be an amazing angle that I'm missing that could really help me understand God better. Like that's fun to me. And when if you can operate from a solid foundation, knowing that the God of the universe is never going to make you fearful, that's not the spirit we've been given. He is a gentleman. He is not pushy, and on through the character of God. And again, test that spirit and say, is this from you, Lord? Would this agree that Jesus is Lord? And on and on.
Yeah.
And when we have a good filter, there's, that verse, everything is permissible, but not everything's beneficial. Like to be able to say, what is here that reflects God honestly, and where does evil want to sneak in a lie and manipulate it and twist it and tell you that, did God really say that? Does he really mean that? Is he trying to trick you and steer us away from truth? So hopefully in this, you guys have maybe picked up some pearls or maybe some confidence or discernment to try out some other things. But
Yes.
as we start wrapping up, Hilda, I want to make sure you get to just tell, yeah, I said when we first talked, you mentioned you're launching a new health coaching program soon. And so tell people about that. What are you up to and how do people follow you and find your work?
Absolutely. So I've got two things that I'm offering on my website right now. And one, the most important to me, is community. I'm calling it the Holistic Hub. Again, alliteration's my thing. I'm hoping it's a space that will encourage people with their health because it's not just a one-shot deal, right? It's a journey.
Right.
So I want to offer encouragement. I'm going to have a private podcast in there. It's a solo cast where I just share my uncensored kind of inner monologue, 15 minutes a week. And then also I'm going to have live some cooking classes and some other modalities in there, like emotional freedom tapping, things that I've come across that I think could be helpful for folks. And then we're going to have challenges. It's going to be so much fun. And I'm launching it November 11th. So that's one thing. And then that's just going to be continual, very small monthly fee for people to join that. Then twice a year, I launch a course. It's called Health for the Long Haul because I don't want people just to have health for today. I want them to keep stacking those hacks.
Yeah.
And I help people incorporate 6 ancestral secrets for healthy habits, including getting the morning sun and honoring their sleep. And along the way, I offer tips and science and ancient wisdom and stories to encourage them. So that happens too. And then, of course, I have all the content on Instagram and on my Holistic Hilda YouTube channel and the Wise Traditions podcast that I host and produce for the foundation. But the one thing I wanted to say that I think is really important, Christian, to add to what you were saying about fear is that perfect love casts out fear.
Yes, it does.
And that's what sustained me during the hardest days in COVID. You guys, in my neighborhood, people would yell at me if I
Tell
didn't
people
wear a
where you
mask.
live, because that's relevant data.
Yeah, I'm actually in Washington, D.C.
See, there you go. Okay,
And
carry
so
on.
it's rough. No, it was rough. And people would yell at me on the street because I wasn't wearing a mask outside. It was really, really hard. But I was like, you know what? To me, the message I was getting over the airwaves and even from my neighbors was a lot of fear. And I was like, I'm just not going to live that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just like, I'm not going to wear a mask because the Bible talks about having uncovered faces. And I thought this lets the glory of God shine. And I want to see my neighbor's face. And I even said to my pastor, I said, what if the hallmark of Christians at this time was that we hugged each other, just like Jesus would touch the
Love it.
leper? Like, what if we did that? I didn't even know in the early days that COVID was nothing to be afraid of, but I was like, what if we did that? And he just looked at me kind of in fear, actually, when I said that. And that didn't really fly with that church. So I had to say goodbye to that one. But I just feel like stand on the promises of God. Know that he is love. We have nothing to fear, and he is going to guide your steps. And one of my favorite verses I want to quote from Jeremiah is, ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. That's from Jeremiah 6. And I just love that. So keep seeking and asking and knocking, and it will be given to you, and you will find it.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was going to ask you the question you have to ask, or you ask everyone, the obligatory, Hilda, if you could have the listener do one thing, but that may have been it. That was great. So I'll put it to you another way. So you always ask people at the end of your show, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would they do? And so maybe turning it back on you, saying, might have you have answered that a year, 5, 10 years ago? How might you answer it now? If the listener could only do one thing, if you could give them some focus or takeaway, is it what you just said, or would there be something that you'd add to it?
I do think the spirit bit is more important than anything else. But right now, if I had to tell them one really concrete thing to do, I would say it'd be to get the morning sun.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I learned the value of that over the recent years through my travels and through conversations with health experts in the quantum health space. And they just said that really sets your circadian rhythm, can boost your metabolism, improves your energy, helps you sleep better. It's like so many things. So I do that. It's a non-negotiable for me. Sunrise before screen rise.
Oh, I like it. Okay, cool. Well, Hilda, thank you so much for this fun and jovial conversation. I'm so honored to have you join me. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much, Christian. I loved it. We'll talk again soon, I hope.
Yes, we will. Thanks for listening to Deconstructing Conventional. If this conversation sparked new questions or helped you see things in a new light, feel free to share it with a friend who is on a similar journey. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode and a perspective that challenges the norm. Check us out on our website at healingunited.today and find us on social media at Healing United, or you can check out the Healing United PMA app. It's a great way to stay connected. Remember, question everything and rebuild intentionally.